A fired factory worker fixed a rich man's car for free, never guessing he'd inherit the company. That single act of kindness, performed with grease-stained hands and a heart heavier than the tools in his worn leather bag, would alter the course of 2 lives forever. But on that rain-soaked Tuesday afternoon, Jack Henderson was just trying to survive another day of unemployment, his world reduced to the cold metal of his toolbox and the crushing weight of failure. 3 weeks earlier, Ridgway Manufacturing had laid off 37 employees. Jack, after 12 years of perfect attendance and quiet dedication, had been among them. Now he stood in his small kitchen, staring at the final notice from the electric company, the red letters blurring beneath his exhausted gaze. 42 years old and starting over. His calloused fingers trembled slightly as he set the bill down beside the others. Mortgage, car payment, his daughter's upcoming college tuition deposit. "It'll work out, Dad," Emma said, appearing in the doorway. At 17, she had their family's characteristic resilience etched into her features, her mother's warm eyes and his stubborn chin. "Something will come along." Jack managed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Course it will, kiddo. Just a rough patch." But the truth sat between them, unspoken yet palpable. Without Sharon, gone 3 years now after the cancer took her, Jack felt adrift. His wife had been the family compass, always pointing toward hope. Now he navigated alone, trying to keep Emma's future from sinking alongside his own. After Emma left for school, Jack grabbed his toolbox. The weight of it, familiar and grounding, was one of the few certainties left. He had skills. He had his hands. He would find something. The April rain fell in sheets as Jack drove through town, stopping at every garage and repair shop. The answers were all the same. "Sorry, nothing available. Times are tough. Maybe check back next month." By mid-afternoon, the sky had darkened to the color of old bruises. Jack pulled his truck into the parking lot of Gina's diner. Not to eat. He couldn't afford that luxury, but to gather his thoughts before heading home to Emma with another day of rejection weighing on his shoulders. That's when he saw it. A sleek, charcoal gray Bentley, hood raised, stranded at the edge of the lot. Beside it stood a man in an expensive overcoat, his silver hair dampened by rain, speaking urgently into a cell phone. Even from a distance, Jack could see the frustration in the man's rigid posture, the agitated gesture of his free hand. For a moment, Jack hesitated. People like that. They had roadside assistance, connections, resources. They didn't need help from unemployed factory workers. But something, perhaps muscle memory from a lifetime of fixing things, propelled him forward, toolbox in hand. The rain soaked through his jacket as he approached. "Car trouble?" Jack asked, his voice nearly lost in a sudden gust of wind. The man turned, surprise flashing across his weathered face. Close up, Jack could see he was older than he'd first appeared. Mid-60s perhaps, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of either worry or laughter. Maybe both. "Roadside assistance says it'll be at least 2 hours. The man said, slipping his phone into his pocket. "And I have a meeting I can't miss." Jack nodded, rain dripping from his baseball cap. "Mind if I take a look? I've worked on cars most of my life." The man hesitated, studying Jack with pale blue eyes that seemed to calculate something beyond the immediate situation. "You're a mechanic?" "Industrial mechanic, actually. Worked at Ridgway Manufacturing until the layoffs." Jack set his toolbox down. "But I know my way around engines. No charge, just thought I might help." A curious expression crossed the man's face, something between surprise and speculation, before he nodded. "I'm Charles Westbrook, and I'd appreciate any help you can offer." The name registered somewhere in Jack's mind, but he was already focused on the engine, his hands moving with practiced precision despite the cold rain. Jack Henderson. Within 15 minutes, Jack had diagnosed the problem, a loose connection in the fuel injection system. His fingers worked nimbly despite being numbed by the rain, making the necessary adjustments with quiet confidence. Charles watched him, sheltered now under the awning of the diner. "You're good at that," he observed. Jack didn't look up. Machines make sense. They tell you what's wrong if you know how to listen. Unlike life, he thought, but didn't say. "And do they tell you how to fix it too?" There was something in Charles's tone, curiosity perhaps, or amusement. "Most times." Jack closed the hood with a solid thunk. "Try it now." Charles slid into the driver's seat, turned the key. The engine purred to life, smooth and powerful. "Remarkable," Charles said, emerging from the car. "What do I owe you?" Jack was already gathering his tools, rainwater pooling at his feet. "Nothing. Glad to help." "I insist." Charles reached for his wallet. "Really, it's fine." Jack's pride, one of the few possessions he had in abundance, stiffened his spine. Just pay it forward sometime. Something shifted in Charles's expression. A recognition, perhaps, or a memory. He extended his hand instead of money. Thank you, Jack Henderson. Jack nodded, shook the offered hand, and turned to leave. He was halfway to his truck when Charles called after him. Mr. Henderson, wait. Charles was holding out a business card. I might have something better than payment. Come see me tomorrow at this address. 9 o'clock. Jack took the card reflexively, squinting at it through the rain. The embossed lettering read, Charles Westbrook, CEO, Westbrook Industries. I'm not looking for charity, Jack said, an edge creeping into his voice. Charles's smile was slight but genuine. Neither am I. I'm looking for someone who knows how to fix things. 9 o'clock. That night, Emma found the business card on the kitchen counter while Jack was showering away the day's grime. Dad, she called through the bathroom door. Do you know whose card this is? Some guy with car trouble. Jack called back, the hot water a brief luxury against his aching shoulders. This is Charles Westbrook. Her voice pitched higher with excitement. He owns like half the businesses in the county. And Westbrook Industries is that huge tech company that's been in the news. They're expanding like crazy. Jack turned off the water, wrapped a towel around his waist. He opened the door to find Emma's face alight with hope, a look he hadn't seen since before the layoffs. He said to come by tomorrow, Jack admitted, taking the card from her fingers. Probably needs his car serviced or something. Emma's eyes widened. Dad, this could be huge. A connection like that? You have to go. I'm not interested in handouts, Em. It's not a handout if you earn it. She countered, sounding so much like her mother that Jack felt the familiar ache of loss. Mom would tell you to go. Jack sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. She was right, of course. Sharon had always pushed him to open doors rather than stare at them, wondering what lay beyond. I'll think about it, he promised. That night, sleep eluded him. Jack lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sharon's empty side of the bed, a hollowness he still couldn't fill after 3 years. Would she tell him to go? To swallow his pride and take whatever opportunity this Westbrook might offer? I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Shar, he whispered into the darkness. The only answer was the gentle patter of rain against the bedroom window. Morning arrived with unexpected clarity. The storm had passed, leaving behind a freshly washed world and a decision. Jack would go, not with expectations, but with the same practical approach he brought to every broken machine. Assess the problem, find the solution, move forward. Westbrook Industries occupied a sleek glass building on the outskirts of town. A facility Jack had passed countless times without much thought. Now, dressed in his best shirt, in the only tie he owned, slightly faded at the edges from disuse, he sat in the reception area, feeling distinctly out of place among the modern furnishings and well-dressed employees. Mr. Westbrook will see you now, the receptionist said, her professional smile revealing nothing. Charles Westbrook's office occupied the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the town below. The man himself stood gazing out at that view, hands clasped behind his back. He turned as Jack entered, that same calculating look in his pale eyes. Mr. Henderson, thank you for coming. Charles gestured to a chair. Please, hurry, sit. Jack remained standing, his discomfort manifesting his stubbornness. I appreciate the invitation, Mr. Westbrook, but I'm still not clear on why I'm here. Charles smiled, a genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face. Direct. I like that. He moved to his desk, pressed a button on his phone. Diane, bring us some coffee, please. And the Ridgway file. The name struck Jack like a physical blow. Ridgway? You know about Ridgway Manufacturing? I know many things, Mr. Hunter Henderson, including the fact that Ridgway laid off 37 skilled workers last month, despite receiving a substantial government grant intended to preserve those very jobs. Charles's expression hardened momentarily. I also know that you worked there for 12 years as a senior maintenance technician with an exemplary record. Jack's mind raced. How do you? I make it my business to know. Charles replied simply, especially when it involves my community. The door opened as a woman entered with a tray of coffee and a folder. Charles thanked her, then slid the folder across the desk toward Jack. Westbrook Industries acquired Ridgway Manufacturing yesterday, Charles said, his tone matter-of-fact. The former owner made some unfortunate decisions. He's no longer involved. Jack stared at the folder, but didn't open it. I don't understand what this has to do with me. That car you fixed yesterday? Charles sipped his coffee. My mechanics at the dealership couldn't identify the problem. They wanted to replace the entire system. thousands of dollars in unnecessary repairs. They weren't listening to it properly, Jack said automatically. Exactly. Charles set down his cup with a satisfied nod. You listened? You understood? You fixed it efficiently with minimal resources. He leaned forward. That's precisely the approach I need at Ridgeway. You're offering me my old job back? No, Mr. Henderson. I'm offering you a new one. I need someone who understands that facility from the ground up. Someone the workers respect. Someone who sees problems as puzzles to solve, not obstacles to avoid. Charles tapped the folder. Operations manager. Full benefits. Substantial salary increase. And, most importantly, autonomy to implement the improvements that management previously ignored. Jack finally sank into the chair, his legs suddenly uncertain. I'm a mechanic, Mr. Westbrook. I fix machines, not companies. In my experience, the principles are remarkably similar. Charles's eyes held a quiet intensity. Something's broken. You identify the problem. You fix it with the tools available. The offer hung between them, impossible, unexpected, and yet somehow fitting. Jack thought of Emma, of college tuitions and mortgage payments, of the stack of bills on his kitchen counter. He thought of his co-workers, friends who had also lost their livelihoods. The other workers who were laid off. Jack said finally, "Oh, what about them?" A smile touched Charles's lips. First question about others, not yourself. Interesting. He leaned back in his chair. Rehiring is phase 1 of the restructuring plan. I need someone to help me determine which positions are essential. Jack studied the man across the desk. Why me? You don't know me. I know enough. Charles stood, walked back to the window. I know you stopped to help a stranger in the rain when you had your own troubles. I know you refused payment for honest work. I know you have the technical skills this position requires. He turned, fixing Jack with that penetrating gaze. But most importantly, I recognize something in you that reminds me of myself 40 years ago. For the first time since entering the office, Jack felt a flicker of something like hope. Cautious, tentative, but present. I'll need time to think about it, he said. Of course. Charles extended his hand. Take the folder. Review the details. But don't take too long. We begin restructuring next week. Jack shook the offered hand, took the folder, and left with his mind swirling with possibilities he hadn't dared imagine 24 hours earlier. Emma was waiting when he returned home, practically vibrating with anticipation. When he told her about the offer, her shriek of delight echoed through their small house. Dad, this is incredible. It's like a movie or something. Jack smiled at her enthusiasm, but felt the weight of uncertainty. It's a big responsibility, Em. I'm not sure I'm qualified. Are you kidding? She grabbed his calloused hands in hers. You've been telling me for years all the things the management at Ridgeway was doing wrong. Now you can fix it. Fix it. The words echoed in his mind. Wasn't that what he'd always done? Fix things that others couldn't or wouldn't? That night, Jack spread the contents of the folder across the kitchen table. The salary made his breath catch, nearly triple what he'd been making. The benefits package included full college tuition for dependents. The job description outlined exactly what Charles had said. Complete authority to restructure operations, implement efficiency measures, and rebuild the workforce. It was everything he needed. So why did his stomach knot with doubt? After midnight, Jack found himself in the garage, absent-mindedly taking apart and reassembling an old carburetor, a meditation of sorts that had always helped him think. The familiar process of disassembly, cleaning, and reconstruction centered him, allowed his thoughts to organize themselves like the mechanical parts in his hands. The truth emerged slowly. He was afraid. Not of the work. Jack knew factories like he knew his own heartbeat. He was afraid of stepping beyond the boundaries he'd lived within for so long. Afraid of the visibility, the responsibility for others' livelihoods. Afraid of failing at something bigger than himself. What would you tell me to do, Shar? He whispered, his fingers working methodically on the metal components. The answer came not in words, but in a memory. Sharon, standing in this same garage years ago, holding up the acceptance letter to the technical program he'd been too uncertain to apply for. Sometimes the only way to know if you can fix something, she'd said, is to open it up and look inside. By dawn, Jack had made his decision. The first days at Westbrook Ridgeway, as the facility was now called, passed in a blur of introductions, assessments, and planning sessions. Charles Westbrook appeared regularly, offering guidance but never undermining Jack's authority. The rehiring process began immediately, with Jack personally calling many of his former colleagues. We're rebuilding, he told each one. And we're doing it right this time. By the end of the first month, production had resumed on a limited basis. Jack implemented several efficiency measures he'd proposed years ago to deaf ears. The atmosphere in the factory shifted. Tentative optimism replaced the resigned hopelessness that had permeated the place before the closure. Charles observed these changes with quiet approval. "You've made remarkable progress," he noted during one of their weekly meetings. "The workers trust you. They know I've been in their shoes." Jack replied simply. As summer faded into autumn, Jack settled into his new role with growing confidence. Emma left for her first semester of college, her future secure in a way Jack had feared might never be possible. The factory expanded operations, even adding new positions. But success brought its own challenges. Jack worked long hours, often returning home to an empty house well after dark. Sometimes he wondered if he was becoming like the previous management, so focused on the facility that he forgot about the lives it supported, including his own. One evening in late October, Jack was reviewing production reports in his office when a knock interrupted his concentration. Charles Westbrook stood in the doorway, looking less like a CEO and more like a concerned friend. "It's 8:30, Jack," Charles said mildly. Jack glanced at his watch, surprised. "I didn't realize it was so late." "You've been saying that a lot lately." Charles entered, settled into the chair across from Jack's desk. "May I speak freely?" Jack nodded, sensing something important in the older man's tone. "You're making the same mistake I made 30 years ago," Charles said, his voice carrying no judgment, only understanding. "Building something remarkable, but forgetting why you're building it. The factory's doing well," Jack began defensively. "Production is up 40%. Employee satisfaction? I'm not talking about the factory." Charles's gaze was steady. "I'm talking about your life, Jack." The words landed with unexpected weight. Jack fell silent, suddenly aware of the emptiness waiting for him at home, of Emma's voice on their weekly calls growing more distant with each passing Sunday. "I had a daughter too once," Charles said quietly. "Alexandra. Brilliant girl, so much like her mother. While I was building Westbrook Industries, she was growing up. By the time I realized what I'd missed, she was gone. Not just to college, but from my life." Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn evening. "What happened?" Charles's eyes held old pain. "Cancer took my wife when Alex was in high school." "Sound familiar?" I responded by burying myself in work, thinking I was securing our future. By the time Alex finished college, we were practically strangers. She moved abroad, built her own life. Calls on birthdays, Christmas cards, that's all we have now. The parallels were too close for comfort. Jack thought of Emma's dorm room he'd never seen, of the parents' weekend he'd missed due to a production emergency. Why are you telling me this?" Jack asked, though he already knew. "Because I see myself in you, Jack. Your dedication, your skill, your integrity." Charles leaned forward. "But also your blind spot. The belief that providing is the same as being present." Jack's throat tightened. "I'm doing this for Emma. Are you?" Charles's question was gentle but direct. "Or are you doing it to prove something to yourself? To the world?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable in its accuracy. Jack had been so focused on demonstrating his worth, on validating Charles's faith in him, that he'd recreated the very system that had once crushed him, a life measured primarily by productivity. "What happened with your daughter?" Jack finally asked. "Did you ever reconnect?" A shadow passed over Charles's face. "No. Cancer doesn't just take wives, it takes daughters too. Alexandra was diagnosed 3 years ago. By the time I reached her in London, she was already gone." He paused, visible emotion tightening his features. "I inherited her things, photos of a life I wasn't part of, friends I'd never met, places we never saw together." The office suddenly felt too small, too confined for the weight of Charles's revelation. Jack understood with crystal clarity why this successful businessman had stopped to speak with a mechanic in the rain, why he'd seen something worth investing in. "I'm sorry," Jack said inadequately. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," Charles replied. "I'm telling you because there's still time for you. Emma's still here. Your story doesn't have to mirror mine." Later that night, Jack sat alone in his kitchen, Charles's words echoing in his mind. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through recent texts from Emma, brief exchanges about classes, new friends, campus events, communication that maintained connection without deepening it. Before he could talk himself out of it, Jack called her. It was late past 11, but she answered on the second ring. "Dad? Is everything okay?" Her voice held concern. Calls this late usually meant bad news. "Everything's fine, Em," he assured her quickly. I just realized I missed asking about your literature class. The one with the professor you said was like a character from a movie. Professor Harrington? Surprise colored her voice. You want to hear about my lit class? Now, if that's okay, Jack said, feeling strangely vulnerable. I want to hear about all of it. Your classes, your friends, the dining hall food you hate, everything. A pause, then Emma's voice softer now. Dad, what's going on? Jack took a deep breath. I had a conversation today that made me realize I've been so focused on providing for your future that I might be missing your present. His voice caught slightly. And I don't want to miss any more of it. The silence that followed felt endless until Emma spoke again, her voice thick with emotion. I miss you too, Dad. So much. They talked for nearly 2 hours. About her classes, her roommate from Seattle who played violin at 2 in the morning, the campus coffee shop where she studied, her doubts about her chosen major, her new friends. Jack listened more than he spoke, absorbing the details of her life with a hunger he hadn't realized he possessed. When they finally said goodnight, Jack made a decision. The next morning, he requested a meeting with Charles. I need to make some changes, Jack began without preamble. To my schedule, my approach. Charles nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. Tell me what you need. A proper management team, delegation structures, regular hours. Jack laid out his plan, not an abandonment of responsibility, but a recognition that true leadership meant building systems that didn't rely solely on him. And I'd like to take a few days off. There's a parents' weekend at Emma's college next month. Done, Charles said simply. All of it. Over the following weeks, Jack restructured not just the factory operations, but his relationship to them. He hired a production manager, implemented team leadership protocols, created reporting systems that highlighted problems before they became emergencies. The factory continued to thrive, but now without consuming every waking hour of his life. He visited Emma at college, met her friends, saw her world. They began a tradition of Sunday video calls that became a highlight of both their weeks. Jack started dating occasionally. Nothing serious, but steps toward a life beyond work. He joined a community restoration project, bringing old machines back to life at the local history museum. Charles observed these changes with quiet approval. Their weekly meetings evolved from strictly business to wide-ranging conversations about the future, philosophy, life beyond the factory walls. Jack came to understand that Charles wasn't just his employer, but his mentor, offering the hard-won wisdom of a path already traveled. As the one-year anniversary of Jack's employment approached, Charles invited him to dinner at his home, a modernist mansion on the hillside overlooking the town. Quite a place, Jack commented as Charles led him through rooms filled with art and mementos from a lifetime of success. Too big for one person, Charles replied matter-of-factly. But it holds my memories for better or worse. They settled in Charles's study, a warm space lined with books and family photographs. Jack noticed several featuring a young woman with Charles's eyes and chin. Alexandra, he presumed. Over dinner, Charles was unusually reflective. Do you know why I really stopped that day in the rain, Jack? Jack shook his head, curious. My car wasn't actually broken, Charles said with a slight smile. At least not seriously. The engine warning light had come on, but it was running fine. I could have easily made it to my meeting. Then why? I saw you pull into that parking lot. Watched you sit there staring at nothing. I recognized that look, a man carrying too much alone. Charles refilled their glasses. I've made a study of people all my life, Jack. It's how I built this company, recognizing potential that others miss, seeing the strength beneath the circumstances. Jack absorbed this revelation, unsure how to respond. So the whole thing was, what? A test? Oh no. Call it an opportunity. For both of us. Charles set his glass down. You needed a second chance. I needed someone who understood the value of fixing what's broken rather than discarding it. We found each other at the right moment. Something in Charles's tone, a finality perhaps, raised Jack's awareness. Why are you telling me this now? Charles smiled faintly. Because it's time for the next phase. He retrieved a folder from his desk, slid it across to Jack. My doctors have given me 6 months, maybe a year. Pancreatic cancer. The irony isn't lost on me, considering what took Sharon and Alexandra. The revelation hit Jack like a physical blow. Charles, I don't know what to say. Nothing to say. Charles's calm was clearly hard-won. I've made my peace with it, but there are practical matters to address. He nodded toward the folder. My succession plan. Jack opened it slowly, scanning the documents inside. As understanding dawned, he looked up in disbelief. This can't be right. It is. Charles's expression remained steady. Upon my death, controlling interest in Westbrook Industries transfers to you, with the Ridgeway facility becoming yours entirely. The remaining shares are divided between various charitable foundations, including a new scholarship fund in Alexandra's name. But I'm not. Jack struggled to find words. This should go to family or longtime executives or... Family? Charles interrupted gently. My family's gone, Jack. As for executives, I've had a lifetime to observe them. They're excellent at maintaining what exists, but few can truly build or rebuild. He leaned forward. You fixed more than my car that day. You showed me that my life's work could continue in the right hands. I don't know if I can accept this responsibility, Jack said honestly. That, Charles replied, is precisely why you're the right choice. He closed the folder with finality. It's done, Jack. The papers are signed. You can refuse, of course. The alternate plan distributes everything to charitable trusts. But I hope you won't. They talked late into the night about the company, about Charles's vision, about the responsibility of wealth and the obligation to use it wisely. By the time Jack drove home, his mind was reeling with the magnitude of what had been placed before him. In the months that followed, Charles's health declined gradually but steadily. He remained involved in the company as long as possible, using the time to mentor Jack in the aspects of leadership that went beyond factory operations. Jack absorbed these lessons with the same focused attention he'd once given to mechanical systems, recognizing that human organizations required even more care and understanding than machines. Emma came home for summer break, now studying business administration rather than literature, a change inspired partly by her father's unexpected career shift. She often accompanied Jack to visit Charles, bringing a youthful energy to the aging man's final days that seemed to briefly rekindle his spirits. She reminds me of Alexandra, Charles confided to Jack during one such visit, as they watched Emma exploring his extensive library. Curious about everything, unafraid to question assumptions. She's the best of her mother and something entirely her own. Jack agreed. I almost lost sight of that, being so focused on providing for her that I wasn't seeing her. But you didn't, Charles reminded him. You course-corrected. That's all any of us can do. In late September, as autumn painted the hillsides in brilliant color, Charles was moved to hospice care. Jack visited daily, often bringing updates about the factory, the company, the community initiatives they'd started together. On a golden afternoon with sunlight streaming through the windows, Charles gripped Jack's hand with surprising strength. Promise me something, he said, his voice thin but determined. Anything, Jack replied. Remember why you fix things. Charles's pale eyes held Jack's gaze, not just to make them functional again, but to restore their purpose. That applies to companies, communities, and people too. I promise, Jack said, throat tight with emotion. Charles died peacefully that night. The funeral was attended by hundreds, employees, business associates, community members, all sharing stories of the quiet ways Charles had influenced their lives. Jack stood with Emma beside him, accepting condolences with a surreal awareness that his life had been irreversibly transformed by a chance encounter in the rain. The transition of leadership was smoother than Jack could have imagined, largely due to Charles's meticulous planning. There were challenges, of course, skepticism from board members, resistance from some executives, the steep learning curve of global business operations. But Jack approached each problem with the same methodical patience he'd once applied to mechanical failures, identifying root causes, implementing solutions, moving forward. 1 year after Charles's passing, Jack stood in his former mentor's study, now his own, looking out over the town where he'd once feared he had no future. The factory was thriving, employment was at a record high, the community was growing. Emma would graduate in the spring, already talking about joining the company with ideas for sustainability initiatives and employee education programs. On the desk sat 2 photographs, one of Sharon, smiling in the sunlight of a long-ago summer, and a newer one of Charles and Jack, taken at the factory reopening celebration. Between them lay a small metal component, the part from Charles's Bentley that Jack had fixed that rainy afternoon. Jack picked it up, turned it over in his fingers. Such a small thing to have changed the course of so many lives. A tiny failure that, once repaired, had led to transformation neither man could have imagined. Outside, the autumn light painted everything in gold. Jack pocketed the small metal piece and headed for the door. The factory management team was gathering for their weekly meeting, and afterward, he was driving to Emma's college for Parents' Weekend. Life continued, moving forward with purpose and meaning. Broken parts repaired, connections restored, new possibilities emerging from what once seemed lost. As he drove through town, Jack passed Gina's diner in the parking lot where it all began. He slowed for a moment, remembering the rain, the hopelessness, the simple act of offering help without expectation of return. Sometimes the things we fix end up fixing us in return.